This is the President McCormack Podcast with your host, Mark McCormack.
Ladies and gentlemen, on the podcast today, Dan Swiss.
Hey, what up, Mark?
Dude, number one, you're the best guest ever off the bat. You made me President McCormack Louis Vuitton shirts.
Oh, I didn't make them. I went to Louis and they just had them.
Oh, Louis had them?
Oh yeah, on the rack, dude. It's exclusive. Like, legitimately, I had to wait quite a while to be admitted to be in line.
Oh.
Yeah.
It was one of those events, right?
It's elite. Yeah.
The problem with those guys is they keep on stealing my shit.
No, I know. Well, the hardest part was convincing them that I actually knew who you were. They're like, dude, please, you don't know that guy.
Yeah. He's so elite that no one knows who he is.
He is on another level. Yeah.
No, dude, but I appreciate this. Is really cool, man. Really cool. In fact, so we just took a picture before we came in here, and I actually. It was funny because I was like, oh, he's got something cool in his shirt. I want to kind of pull his jacket back for the thing. And I was like, oh, it's my name.
That's right. That's right.
That's freaking awesome. Yeah. So number one question I love to ask people is, how do you know me?
Yeah, well, we met through the We Are the They group. And so that was, we met, St. George at, retreat. That was pretty awesome. Yeah. I mean, that was when we were jumping off that cliff and a couple other crazy experiences. So yeah, I'd say that's pretty much it.
Isn't that wild that we did that?
Yeah.
9 months ago, we didn't know who each other were, and now we've gone through like experiences and like we have common goals and we're like on this path that like will never be destroyed. Like it's wild, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I've done a lot of different random things. And one of the things I did for, a long time was I did sales, door-to-door sales. And you run into a lot of dogs. It's weird. So a buddy of mine, one of my favorite people ever that helped me like get through my very first year selling, his name is Brent Lewis. He's freaking awesome. But he's like, dude, we need to like learn how to connect and like control these dogs. Cause we're in this weird city full of dogs. Yeah. And we were watching all this, Caesar, whatever, the dog whisperer. And he's got this whole thing where he's like, hey, you want to take an animal with massive potential and get them to where they're supposed to be. Quickest, easiest way, put them in a pack. Put them in the right pack with the right type of dogs, the right type of this, that, the other, and just give it a little bit of time, and your dog will be amazing. And so that was kind of one of the baseline motivations for me to, join a group like that where I've got a lot of things that I want to do and not a lot of talent or ability or knowledge on how to do it. I'm just like, I want that. It's like, hey,
there's no line on the podcast. There? You got plenty of talent.
well, in certain areas, yeah, for sure. Yeah. There's things that I'm really good at, and there's a lot of things that I'm like, man, I want to have success in a lot of different areas. I want to have fulfillment in a lot of different areas. And there are individuals that I've met in that group that are just, it's so easy for them. And it's so hard for me. And I'm like, man, I don't get it. I don't understand it. But the coolest part is connecting with the right people that can give you those, guidance, tips, cheat codes, whatever. And then accountability behind it where it's like, dude, you don't want to be fat? Like, cool. I'll show you how to not be. Yeah. But then you actually have to do what I tell you. Yeah. And so that combined accountability and, support, like, there's nothing like that. So like you were saying, it's the kind of thing where long-term, it doesn't really fall apart because the results really speak for themselves. And one of the things I've really enjoyed about it is there is this really unique kind of pressure, because I've played sports and I've done a lot of things where there is pressure there. I've done sales and there's pressure there, but a lot of times it comes from kind of almost prove to me that you're valuable. It's like that stepdad kind of thing where it's like, my dad never was nice to me. And he's always, and some people that motivation really works, where they're like, oh man, I really need to step up and be something. But this has been interesting because it's a different motivation. It's like hey man, you're valuable, period. Like there's no but, there's no comma, just you're valuable. Now let's go do something with it. I love that because every time people are like, man, you suck, but prove to me that you're something. Yeah. Dude, I just don't like that. I feel like that negative motivation just eats me up. So flipping the script on it where it's like, no. Just because you're successful or not successful has no bearing on your value. You're valuable by default. Now let's go leverage that and go get the things you really want. Go get the experiences you love. That's one of my favorite things is like the laundry list of like, oh, I want to do this. I want to do that. And it's like, now I got, 150 awesome people that all want to do the same stuff to make it happen.
I like that you feel that way because I want everyone in our group to feel that way. Right. Because I look at it as like, we have all these insecurities that people kind of bring and they hold and they carry, and we've done little activities to try and get rid of those, but it's like this group will fly and soar and be on a rocket ship if every single person in here is just like, you know what, I'm worthy to be here, I'm excited to be here, I'm going to contribute, and I don't need to worry about belonging or like any of that garbage, because you belong, you're part of the 50 guys, so let's just run, let's share with each other, let's give each other advice, let's do all the things that help everyone to get better. And then, what are we, 9 months into this thing? Something like that, a 2.5 year program. And so it's like, yeah, man, at the end of the day, in the 2.5 years, I want to look back and be like, man, I grew a ton. Not only with relationships, but like, interpersonal stuff that just made me better.
Yeah. It's interesting. Like the warning label on it, if you get the product is like, well, if you want growth, you're going to have to sacrifice comfort, which I thought was really interesting because being around a group of really inspiring people that are really pushing you, and then, being excited and happy about some of the results, but also like, it's a weird thing. It's almost like when you're training and trying to get really, really strong, like, you just have to commit to being uncomfortable. And that part's been really nice in a weird way, because a lot of the discomfort is why people quit, and having people that are doing it at the same time. So it's kind of like that, brotherhood through suffering, right? It's military, that kind of thing. And then also the assumption of like, well, no, we're going to succeed together. And I've been really surprised. Like there've been guys who are like, hey, I'm struggling with this thing. And they're like, yeah, I'm going to commit. I'm going to do this stuff. And, a month later, 2 months later, they come back and say, yeah, man, I totally failed. I've tripped up. And it's that moment when you see the defining characteristic of what kind of culture is there is, what's the response? Is it like, oh, it's cool. Like, whatever, don't worry about it. Or is it like, oh man, you suck. Like we're all in this and you failed, like, hit the road. Or is it somewhere in the middle of those two where it's like, look, we don't condemn you at all. Like, look, we're all in this to fail. Like you're going to fail your way to success. Like, don't let that be, you're already beating yourself up enough. Stop. But let's go recommit, and that part's been really exciting. That's a tough thing, I think, in life with most people, because we, in this, this Instagram world we live in, we spend a lot of time seeing the best side of everybody, and not even the best moments, the curated best moments, like the best of the best. And, you get it culminated where you see, you start to almost put together this non-real human, this non-real life, where it's the best parts of not just one person, of everybody. You're like, oh, this guy is rich, and this guy has the beautiful family, and this guy does these awesome trips, and this. And you start to put that together, and you start to have this entitlement of like, well, I'm not that dumb. I should be able to have all the same things that this guy has, but that guy doesn't have all those things. He has one of those things that he's been showcasing lately, and he only had it for that moment. Right. Yeah. I think to me, that's one of the parts of having people get really open and real and clear, and sharing that with others, that it's okay for you to confront the weaknesses you have, that it's okay for you to like embrace you for whoever you are. And to not live in a world of comparison, but more a world of like empowerment, of saying, look, this lifestyle you want, like you can actually have it, but let me help you understand the difficulty of how you're going to obtain that, and whether or not there will be trade-offs. Like we were talking about, I'd gone to a mastermind retreat, a number of years ago with a friend, and the only way I was going to make it is if I brought my kid. And I was like, hey, is it cool? Like, he's going to go to bed early and stuff, they were going to this swanky cabin and all that. And, and it's interesting how you mentioned some of the most talented, successful people, like their real focus is on, everything works. In fact, you should make your family life, your kids, your friends a priority. not the other way around.
Yeah.
And it was awesome because it was fun. I got to bring the kid and got, Uncle Jimmy and all that. That's funny, but it's been a really wonderful process, at least for me so far, because I'm pushing so hard in every area of life, having a better relationship with my wife, having a better relationship with my kids, having a better relationship with my extended family, with my friends, having pushing really, really hard in business. Like we've been working through some exciting and difficult times, it's great opportunities, compounded by the fact that the whole world is always, unpredictable and difficult. So to have a group that's like, look, man, let me tell you what I'm dealing with and let's compare notes and see. And half the time, man, when you sit down and really get into it, like you'd pick your own problems back, if that makes sense. If we all sat in a room with 20 people and everybody put their problems on the table, like before then you'd be like, oh man, I wish I was this guy. I wish I was that guy. And then you like see the real and you're like, oh man, yeah, I'm actually doing okay. Yeah. I'll keep going with my struggles.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I've heard that before, like you'd always pick your own problems back up. And I've actually questioned that before. I'm like, I don't know. I'm doing pretty good at mine. Maybe I can handle someone else's a little bit better, But when you really are honest about it, right? You're like, oh, hell no, I'll take my own shit back. Mostly probably because you created it, right? And so not only did you create it, you kind of like want to be accountable for it. And I don't know, I'm kind of one of those guys where like, I want to figure stuff out. And so like, I'll just die until I figure it out.
Yeah. It's like, well, I had that challenge you helped me out with. So a couple of 3-4 months ago, we were meeting in your office and we're talking through like, how do you navigate like powerful but difficult players?
Yeah.
I've got a lot of amazing partners and amazing, business leaders and sales leaders, but your interest and their interest don't always line up.
Yeah.
And sometimes they're a little bit devious, those duplicitous individuals that, as long as the economic piece is lined up, you can count on them doing what they think is best for themselves. But the moment that's not, that dog will turn and try to bite you. But anyways, that helped me a ton, like your insight on how to, just stay calm throughout that storm of, hey, you're just going to have to deal with it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just the truth, right? You just have to deal with crap, and it's such a, people jump into the business world and in their personal life, and they're so closely related. The way you handle things in your personal life are generally the way that you handle things in your business life. And I've had employees that it's interesting because their personal life and their business life are like opposite ends of the spectrum. And I'm always like, how do you pull this off? And most of the time, honestly, it's because they're a little crazy, and it's, we have yin and yang everywhere, right? There's good and there's bad in everything, right? Like our relationship with our spouses, right? I mean, normally we're really, really good, and every now and again it's bad, and it's our fault, right?
Yeah.
And then sometimes I have like these employees, I'm speaking of one in particular, he's really, really good. But then when he goes home, it's like his life is just absolute freaking chaos, But he never lets that like come into the business world, which is rare, Because like if I'm off with my wife, dude, I'm off at work. For sure. Like it's just, I can't focus on anything else unless I'm good with my wife,
Yeah.
And some people, man, they can just compartmentalize that. And then they're just like, no, work's kind of my safety. And this is where I come to like find serenity. And then I just go home back at the chaos. Oof. You know what I mean? Have you ever met guys like that, employees like that?
Yeah. Someone said that to me once. They're like, hey, when you are having trouble, like, emotionally, right? Like if something's really bugging you and like, and you're just trying to like figure out how to like deal with it. Like, especially, you have those things where you have a problem or at least a perceived problem. And then you're just running scenarios over and over. And it's like, your brain won't let it go. Right. And they were saying, they're like, well, yeah, just choose to change. And it's like, oh, that's, it's so much easier said than done. And the example they always gave is they're like, if you're like having a fight with somebody like your friend or your wife or whoever, and you're having this fight, and then like, you get dropped off and you got to go into a business meeting or go somewhere else. They're like, notice how quickly you can shift gears almost instantly. You can go from like angry, frustrated, all emotionally tied up to like, oh, hey, yeah, I'm like fun and bubbly guy. And it's interesting because it's like, well, is that just a caricature? Is that just a face you're putting on? Like, hey, do you just put on the business face and be professional and then handle the problems? Or do you literally just in that moment choose that, okay, currently I'm choosing not to be emotionally charged.
Yeah.
I'm choosing to calm down and go forward and, focus on something that's not the problems. It's interesting. Like I have an uncle and a few other, family members, cousins and stuff that are pilots. And one of the things they always highlight, they're like in the military and, aviation, everything. They're always super focused on where you're going. Because if you focus on where you don't want to go, you end up there anyway. So like, dude, you don't want to hit the mountain? Look where you're flying. Don't look to see that you're not hitting the mountain because you're going to hit it. Yeah. And so it's just like you said, it's an interesting concept of like, as you're working so hard, as you're trying to sort your way through these things, can you make sure that you're good with your wife? And the part that I thought it was always been the most revelatory to me, that Melissa brought up in her trainings and stuff, is most of the time by the time you get to the problem, the cause is much farther back. And when you're sitting there saying, I'm the victim, or this is happening, that's happening, you're focusing on the problem. You're focusing on the results of your previous stuff. So like all you have to do is just instantly decide that you're going to remove the emotion from the situation. You're going to stop and say, okay, as if I walked into a new meeting with fresh people, new people, I'm going to stop, cut off all the previous emotion, and then ask those deep questions of, am I really doing what this other person values properly, consistently, right? So like in the relationship status, are you providing a environment and a relationship where the other person feels genuinely like heard and safe, right? And a lot of times, man, you back that up, you've got all this emotion and anger or whatever it is wrapped up in the fight, but the fight only occurred because at some point, somewhere farther back, you failed to do the routine maintenance of, am I providing, safe environment? Am I providing a heard environment? And I think it's interesting because a lot of times in business and other things, you can apply the same formula to say, okay, I'm in this situation, I'm emotionally charged, I'm dealing with this conflict, this bad salesperson, this bad partner, this difficult competitor, whatever it is, right? But if you can remove the emotion, step back and say, okay, this is the result of previous something. It's most likely neglect on your own part to do something in advance. Like, hey, my tire's flat. And it's like, okay, well, how did it get flat? And it's like almost always you go back a little bit and it's like, oh, well, there was this and this other thing I could have done beforehand to have prevented the crisis situation, and I didn't. So you take that ownership, but you also take the emotion out of it, the anger, the frustration, the kicking and screaming. And you're just like, all right, well, to fix this, I've got to go back. And it's funny because like you were saying with your your spouse, where it's like you live probably a little bit more earnest life where you're the same guy at home, at work, all across the board, where a lot of the people, like, they've got their hat, let me put on my work hat. And it's almost like they use that as ability to pretend they have the emotions right. But it's a great life lesson that says, well, dude, if you put the work hat on and you can drop the emotion and go be a positive, nice guy to your coworkers, then freaking put that on at home if you have to, and be a positive, nice guy to your kids and your wife or whatever it is, so that you can go back and say, hey, well, how did we get to this fight? Not, hey, I'm right, you're wrong, let's deal with the fight. No. All you're going to do is just re-up the same emotions you just were trying to get rid of. Yeah. You put the...
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. I mean, see, I'm a big guy on choice, and it's like, you choose the life you want to live. The choices that you have made have put you in the position that you're at. Right? Yeah,
you build the life you live.
Yeah, you built
it. As beautiful and as terrible as that sentence is, you're like, I built this? Yeah. Crap.
Well, the good thing is, if you build something, we'll just say wrong, right? then go back and build it again.
Yeah.
You know, we have time, we don't have time, and we have time, right?
Well, and think about it. It sounds weird, but you are, what do you call that when someone doesn't die? You are, what's the word?
Like infinite?
You're infinite.
Yeah.
You're immortal.
Immortal. There we go.
Someone said this to me. They said, hey man, every day you wake up is another day you're temporarily immortal.
Right.
Because if you don't wake up, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's such an interesting thought. It's like, dude, you have infinite time. People always are like, oh man, I have limited time. I only have so much time. It's like, dude, if you don't wake up, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
The moment you do, you've got infinite time. So yeah, you everything is always worth fixing or rebuilding, or like you said, starting again from experience.
Yeah.
Because guess what? Tomorrow you're going to wake up again. And as far as you know, you are freaking immortal.
Yeah.
And the moment you're not, well, it won't matter then. So
Yeah, it doesn't matter. I like that. Yeah, I've never heard of it explained that way. It's true. Yeah, I mean, you got today. Today's the day we got. I think one thing that I've always tried to tell people when they ask for my advice is you have to deal with things in the moment. So important, right? Because if you're shelving things all the time, you're just building a big shelf of shit that's just going to break, Yeah. And I think as you've honed your interpersonal skills and you're honest with yourself and you can recognize problems and things that you need to deal with right now, you just deal with them right now. And then eventually your life becomes a lot more simple, right? Because you're not rehashing old things because you've dealt with them, fixed them, and you moved on, right? Yeah. But if you're constantly shelving things, it's very, very difficult to actually move on. Yeah. You see it in relationships all the time, right? Where people are like, well, we don't talk about that. How on earth can you have a good relationship when you can't talk about things? I mean, the definition of like being with your spouse is this is the person that I can deal with the hardest stuff with all the time because we have a commitment level and we're always going to deal with the hard things. But if you always shelf those and never deal with the hard things, eventually they blow that relationship up. At least something that I've seen. Yeah,
that's a good concept, man. You definitely have to deal with reality as it is. And I think, again, it's like the idea of like you get to the problems because there's been some kind of negligence in the past, some kind of lack of maintenance. And I'm feeling super guilty right now because my garage is just atrocious. And my wife is always like, hey, you should probably address this at some point. And I'm like, man, you're right. And I sometimes I pass it off where someone once told me, they're like, look, if you want to be really successful in certain areas, you need to understand that for a temporary time period, certain things are going to probably be left neglected slightly, right? Because you've got the time during the day, you're focusing super, exclusive on this thing. It's like, but over time, at some point, you have to have a plan to circle back and unshelf those things, right? So, and they're like, one of the biggest problems is that people, they don't have that plan. They're like, oh, I'm going to shelf these things and then I'm never going to come back to it. And then pretty soon they're like hoarder garage like me.
Yeah. With a bunch of ticking time bombs too, right? Because you can't have, like, your spouse is a good example, right? You can't have an unsaid thing or an undone thing with them for a long time.
No.
Because every day they're looking at you like, why don't you fix this? Why don't you talk about this? Why don't you bring this up, And they might be quiet about it, but it's just tick, 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 tick. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, I can't believe this is a big deal to you. We talked about that 6 months ago. It's like, yeah, but we never resolved anything.
Yeah. I mean, dude, I'll tell you, that's something that I wish I was more talented at in general. And it's one of the things that I look for in, successful, talented people is like, hey, so help me understand the process where you have better relationships with everybody, friends, family, spouse. And then how do you maintain that? So something I did, years ago and have done since then is, I specifically have carved out time, for certain relationships. So, dates and kids and I learned a little bit of this. There's this awesome, brilliant guy named Mark Cram who started this big company. And he mentioned, he's like, dude, I'm not very good at focusing. I find myself like, getting hyper focused on whatever it is in front of me. And I deal with the same issue. I mean, I don't know, you probably have the same thing. Do you ever like oh, I'm just going to shovel the walk. And then pretty soon you like shovel the driveway and shovel it's like, dude, you had time for the walk, not everything else. Like, what are you doing? You know, it's like, oh, I was just going to clean, you know, part of the bathroom. And then pretty soon you're like, you know, remodeling. But he's got this strategy, and I thought it was just so brilliant, where he breaks up his days, his quarters, his years with specific alarms that are preset. It's like, I've got an hour in the morning to be all in on my kids, drop them off, do the thing, boom, hit work. I've got this chunk of time to go all in on the, you know, everything that I want to accomplish is segregated into these blocks. You know, it's like the, you know, fill the jar up with the golf balls and then the small pebbles and then the sand kind of thing. But they had done it with these alarms. And it's funny because my wife loves the results. She's always like, oh man, you're doing great this, great that, great that. But she hates that I have like 100 alarms on my phone now. Cause it's like every couple hours, like, you know, it's just making some noise. And she's like, dude, you know, it's like the water drop, like a couple of drips is not that bad, but after a while, but it's my hack. It's how I've, you know, I didn't come up with it. I borrowed it from brilliant people, but this idea of like every day, every quarter, every, you know, segment, I've got to have it, you know, set out so that I don't, have areas that fall into like at least areas I care about. Cause that's the other part that's a little bit tricky is you set your goals, you set your priorities, and I don't know the proper word. Maybe it's like anti-orties or sub-orties or whatever you'd call it. It's essentially things where you're like, I'm specifically going to take this and say, normally this would bug me. Normally I would be all about it, but I'm going to make that a non-priority. And what I found is the smartest thing you can do is if you can muster it, figure out a way to spend most of your working time on the high value activities that create higher income. And then the things that need to be done, but like you want to like subjugate it, like cleaning my garage, right? There are companies that do that. Like if you're out like mowing your lawn or shoveling or all the little things that come at you, it's like, well, do you enjoy doing it? Is it fun? Are you doubling up? Like, oh yeah, like I'm doing it, but it's like a workout too, or whatever you want to classify it, right? But if not, it's like, dude, the best way you make your family, your kids, your work, whatever it is, a priority is by elimination of the things that would conflict with that. So I do the mix where it's like, I have the alarms that remind me what I'm working on every hour, every segment of the day. And then I try my very best to say, okay, well, what are the things that are going to fall apart if not maintained? And who can I ask to do that instead of me?
Yeah. No, I think it's great. I mean, you've done something that I tell people to do all the time. You create a system, you know, create that system for you. It doesn't matter. It's got to work for you. Right. It's also with wealth creation. You know, I do a little bit of consulting with people and, you know, about wealth creation. And it's funny. I'm always like, you have to build a system. You probably heard me on the calls every now and again, right? Say that. Yeah. And people, to me, it's so simple to do that. And I know exactly what I mean because I'm the one saying it. But like a lot of people are like, what does he mean by a system? You know, and it's like you create alarms, you know, you create little goals, or you have like Jimmy, one of the guys I freaking love, he still uses the mission like planner thing. You know, he pulled it out one day. I was like, bro. And he's like, oh, I love this thing. You know, it's like he has everything in there, but that's his system. That's how he gets stuff accomplished because that's how he's built that up.
Yeah, a week at a time, hyper focus. That's really cool. Yeah.
Oh, I mean, and I started learning that stuff when I was on my mission. Absolutely. We had every 15 minutes planned, you know, that's the little blocks you have all the way down that list, right? You're just built, you know, every single day, every single hour, you know, and it's like studying here, got to do this, got to do that. And the way I verbalize it now is you silo off everything, you know? Mm-hmm. So then I went to college and I got married pretty early. And I was like, crap, okay, I know I have to spend time with my wife, right? And I want to. I'm going to college, right? And I want to. And I'm working kind of because I have to, but I also kind of want to, right? Yeah. And I had those three things and it's like, okay, so Sunday I'm not going to do anything with school, right? But when I'm at school, I actually used to take my classes and I would put 1.5 hour breaks between them. And the reason why is because that was my study time. Now, and if I didn't study during that time, it wasn't going to happen. So when I was in college, I was either getting A's or F's, right? I got all A's, but because there was nothing in the middle, right? I didn't structure my life in a way that I could kind of study, or like, I'm going to find an hour somewhere. Like, bro, you can't find an hour. You have to plan an hour.
Yeah.
And that's just the way it was. And so I knew by Friday at 5:30, right? I was done working. I was done doing school. I was spend time with my wife time. And it's interesting how that's built our life, because during the week, there's been times where like I barely see my kids. I barely see my wife. And there's no animosity at home because of that, because they trust that I am working and building.
Right. You know, and they know what you're doing. They know, hey, at this hour you're
I'm not off golfing with my buddies or like just sitting in the office doing nothing. Like there's work product, there's proof, there's all sorts of stuff. A little bit of trust as well, especially at the beginning. But then when I was present, I was present. You know, like with our walk group things, right? Like I don't do any work when I'm there. Mm-hmm. I am there to I'm there, number one, to have fun. That's my number one goal every time. I want to go down there and have fun and be fun and bring the noise. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And then I'm also there to do everything I'm asked to be done. That's secondary. And they're very, very close. So, you know, if we're going to get in a group and get vulnerable, boom, I'm going to go as hard as I possibly can. Just like, and maybe being hard is more of a bro thing to say. It's like, I'm going to be 100%.
Yeah, you're committed. Like, I'll tell you, a lot of times there are benefits to certain activities that you are kept from you because the activity itself is quite ridiculous. Yeah. Right. It's like, hey, we're going to do this draw activity, or we're going to listen to this, meditation thing. And it's like, for a lot of people, it's like, well, yeah, this isn't really my jam. And it's like, dude, of course it's not your jam. And you'll finish it and be like, yeah, that was ridiculous. Like I got nothing from that. Right. Yeah. But the crazy part is with 100 people, you finish it and there's a handful of people that are like, dude, that was transformational. And it's like, are you serious? Like, how is that beneficial at all? But it is what it is. Like if you are afraid to fail or afraid to try or afraid to be a little bit exposed, embarrassed, vulnerable, whatever, you'll say no to stuff where later you'll really regret it. Like we did that little trip in St. George where they had the guy come down and do breath work, right? Yeah. I thought it was interesting, right? And I'm like, okay.
That's on my mind right now.
Straight up felt like I was in like high school where the kids are like, hey, breathe a ton and then tip your head over and you'll pass out. I'm like, yeah, no, I'm not doing that. And so we do it and I was like, it's okay. I'm hyperventilating a little bit, right? Okay. It's one of those things where I'm like, yeah, whatever. I'll just, chalk it up to, fun activity we tried. Yeah. Well, since then, between now and then, months have passed, and it's one of the things that pops up all the time. Like if I'm like overly stressing about something, or if I'm something, whatever it is, like it hits me at least once or twice a day where I'm like, I haven't been breathing much, right? I find that when I'm really focused or I'm really stressed or I'm really something, or I'm really like preoccupied, you barely breathe at all. Like super shallow breaths. Like a lot of the times, like your whole body is quite tense, face, chest, cause it's that fight or flight reflex and you're in the middle of fighting something. Like you're hustling, you're working, you're typing, you're hunched over, whatever it is. And, anyways, it's been super beneficial because it's like, oh, hey, PS, like your whole thing, like your brain, like it runs on oxygen and you don't have a lot of it. Yeah. So you want to think better. You want to create better work product. You want to like have better decisions, better logic, better results. Like you probably should breathe, like stop, take some deep breaths, reset, get fresh, then start again. And so it was funny because the activity itself, I was like, yeah, this is, okay. Like you said, you want to be 100% present. You want to go all in because you just don't know. You don't know what you might miss by not being there.
Well, the breathwork thing was it's funny you're saying that because as you were talking earlier, I was just thinking, I'm like, yeah, breathwork. Like the one thing that I'm just like, what the hell are we doing? Yeah. And, but I was all in. So the guy stood up, and I like the guy. He's funny.
Yeah, he's
kind
cool.
of short. He's standing on the chairs, doing the whole thing. We're also at a top golf.
Let's be honest. Compared to you, most people are short.
Yeah. But I'm like, okay, breath work. I've heard a lot of people talk about this. Let's do this. And I'm just like, doing like and I call it hyperventilating too. And I'm like, bending over, putting my head back up, and I'm just like, I'm getting nothing. Like there's not one thing about this. And I'm like, hey, go harder. And I'm just like, just going crazy. Yeah. And it's like, but when we get done, right? So I'm sitting there And I'm like, didn't do much for me. And I kind of had a quick resolve where I was like, next time it might be a little more darker, a little more gentler, you know, I'll probably get it better next time, you know, but I'm going to do this 5-10 times before I like make a hard judgment on it. Right.
Yeah.
And, you know, then we're sitting there and guys start like sharing their experience and they're like having transformational moments. And I'm thinking, huh? Like, okay. You know, and I'm not doubting that they did. Right.
Yeah.
Cause that's them. That's their personal thing. But I'm like, for me, I'm like, shit. I'm like, I'm a million miles away from like having a moment. Yeah. You know, but when you just said, you know, it's actually reminded me to take some deep breaths along the way. I'm going to incorporate that. Yeah. Because I've never even thought back to it other than like, yeah, I breathe really hard for about 30 minutes. Is that how long we did it for? Or 40 or whatever. You know, and I'm just like, my nose hurt. It was getting kind of dry. You know what I mean? Yeah. And I've even had some people be like, yeah, man, anytime I just need to get deep meditation, I just do breath work. And I'm always like, I don't know what that means yet, but one day I will. Well, and maybe the meaning is it won't work for you, right? Yeah. But that's the part I think is most crucial about life is that there's 100 different ways to get to the same solution. And if any of them look or appear a little bit, whatever, embarrassing, weird, strange, you may miss out on something that is the only way, right? Hey, I want to hike to the top of the mountain. I want to go up. And it's like, well, the trail goes down first. Right. Well, if you don't try it, you're never going to get to the top of that mountain. So, like you said, hey, you're testing a few times. And I think being able to say, hey, this isn't for me. I think it's okay. I think that's one of the biggest flaws of people developing is that, either the pronouncement that this method, this ideology, this dogma, this whatever is the way, the only way that you can attain whatever you were trying to do. Yeah. Hey, you can only get successful in business if you go into finance. You can't get there any other way. You got to go to college. You can't get there. I think a lot of times the answer is, yeah, dude, there's incredible benefit that could be reaped out of almost any experience in life if you do what you do. You go all in, you give it a full, college try. And then you might be surprised, like I was, where it's like, oh, later on, like you start to glean some really good benefit from it. Yeah. But it also, like, I think the real core message was there's a lot of stuff that I really, really need to learn. There's a lot of stuff that I need to experience. Like one of the things I did recently was I started to try to figure out how do I consume more of the books I bought. I love books. It's stupid, but the hardback, like, I want to have the freaking gigantic, library, whatever. Right. Yeah. And I don't want some library. It's like, oh yeah, those are like 500 books and I've read none of them. Right. I want to be like, dude, I've read all of them. I've gleaned as much as I could out of it. And so I'm restructuring some things so that the books that are in my office are the ones I need to read. And all the books that are in my bigger office downstairs, like the library section, are all the ones I've already read. Okay. Right. So there's almost like this physical manifestation of everything I have consumed. Consuming to somewhere and then taking it somewhere else. I like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that way when I sit down, I'm like, well, dude, there they are. They're like physically there, just staring me in the face, like, hey, you need to read this book. Yeah. And then I also started doing two things. One, before I read the book, I noticed that basically everything that exists, someone has done a summary on. Right. So I'm like, dude, before I read this book of like, oh, I don't even know where we're going. It's like assembling a puzzle without looking at the box. I'll listen to like a 10 or a 30-minute summary of the book of saying, here's the highlights. Here's why it's awesome. So then when I start actually reading it, it becomes a bit of a really good deep dive into how I can apply it to my own existence, my own, improvement in the context of the whole picture that I've kind of cheat coded on. But yeah, anyways, that's just my approach to trying to glean something out of everything.
I'll tell you something you're probably going to find interesting, at least. I, for probably 12 or 13 years, have been so disappointed by books that I almost never read them. I in my 20s, I pounded out self-help books. Mm-hmm. Right. Just pounded them out. I mean, 1 or 2 a month easily. There was times where I just went through all of them. Right. And just name them, all the big ones. Right. And then I started like having these little epiphanies, I guess, where I was just like, this is telling me nothing new. Then I'd read the next one. I'm like, this is covered in like 3 of the other books that I was in. And I was getting like to the point where like everything was so like regurgitated and done. And to my credit a little bit, I had taken so much knowledge out of those books and applied them. Yeah. Right. And it was really helping my life out. There was a lot of things in those first books that I was, you know, I mean, I'm probably talking 300 books in 10 years. Right. Yeah. And it was like, you know, like, why am I not learning anything new? Why is it just the same stuff over and over again? Yeah. And if you would have talked to me when I was 35, I'm 41 now. I'm just like, I don't read books anymore. It's all the same shit. Yeah. Well, you want me to summarize every book for you? Go do something.
Yeah. Right? Well, dude, look at you're kick A now. So
yeah. I mean, I could be better.
It worked.
I needed to be a little bit more humble. I've been reading some more books the last year. Right. Yeah. And I'm purposely trying to get books to kind of get better, you know? But well,
I'll tell you one thing. Yeah. One of my cheat codes. If I listen to the summary and they go through and they say, hey, here are the highlights. And if it's not like, if something doesn't hit me that says, this is an area that you probably could do better on. Yeah. And here is a master course on that area. I don't read that book. Cause I got a shelf of, 100 books waiting to be read. Yeah. And so I'll listen to the 20-minute summary. I'll give the book 20 minutes. And if it's awesome, then I read the rest of the book. Half the time I do the gym thing where I listen to the book after I've read the summary. I listen to the book on tape or on YouTube or whatever. Yeah. If I'm traveling a lot, that's what I used to do. I used to travel a ton. And then that would be my plane thing. Like I don't watch movies or whatever. I bring a book, I bring a pen and I write in the book. I write notes, I write thoughts. Because the purpose for me most of the time with the book is I'm hoping that it will counsel me on how to succeed in something I want to do better at, or I want to change, or want to something. But I totally agree with you where it's like, dude, we have infinite time, we have limited time, Yeah. And so if you're going to fill it with, like you said, hey, I read this book and it's nothing new. I mean, that's the whole point of those two things is 1, remind you of stuff that you needed to remember, and 2, teach you stuff you didn't know. And if neither of those apply, like, it's like doing reps in the gym where you're not really trying to actually accomplish anything.
Yeah. Yeah. It takes a purpose out almost.
Yeah.
That's a good point. See, I'm funny on planes now too. I used to travel a ton. Yeah. Right. Like I'm getting close to the 1 million mile mark with Delta. And Delta wasn't even my primary place for like 10 years. It was Southwest. So I've done my time on planes. Yeah. Like I'm at the point where I'm like, no, thanks.
Isn't it funny? People are like, man, wheels up. And I'm like, yeah, no, I'm good.
Yeah. I was like, oh, people used to be like, oh, you travel all these states and it's so amazing. And I'm just like, yeah, it's not. I'm away from my family. I'm alone a lot. It's lonely. I accomplish what I need to accomplish, but like, But like, so, I went to Iceland recently with the We Are the They adventure trip thing. And dude, I don't even turn the TV on, and I'm in first class almost every single time. Right. So it's kind of nice. You got your whole little thing there, blah, 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 blah. I put the flight pattern on so I know where we're at. I actually have either books or talks that I'm listening to. I listen to a lot of talks because I like the compactness of them. Right. Yeah. And I just put my headphones in and I close my eyes and I sit there, and most people would think that I'm sleeping. But really, I'm consuming media, and I'm trying to it's almost like I'm meditating and listening to a book or a talk at the same time, just getting rid of it. In fact, the last book I actually read on a plane, I went down and gave a speech at a financial speech at this thing in Texas a couple months ago. It's probably 6 months ago or something. And I started reading Atomic Habits because actually Max gave it to me.
Yeah, beautiful book.
Yeah. And I
definitely one of those ones that chastises you, where you're like, it's so easy. You're failing because you're not making your bed. You're like,
well, see, and that was my thing. I read 65% of it on the way down, right? So like 3 hours or 2.5 hours, and I was like, all this book is telling me to do is build a system. Mm-hmm. They're calling it habits, but it's just choices. You're going to keep on building and stacking choices every single day, and then you're going to be consistent with those and just keep it moving. And I'm like, And so I started writing notes on the book, right? Because I was like, okay, I'm going to and I wanted to dive into that book a little bit more than usual because Max gave it to me as a gift. And Max has given me a couple of books over time that have been really good. And it's almost like the thing, like if you want me to read a book, like give it to me. Because I'm just like, oh shit, now I got to freaking read this book because my friend gifted it to me, right? I'm going to honor their intention with giving me this book. And it was funny, we were talking about it after, and I don't think Atomic Habits is anything revolutionary. I think it's just, I actually feel kind of more like you. It's more of a reminder that you could be doing better than actually like blowing my mind and being like, yeah, dude, just make a bunch of choices. And it's like, yeah, I know. That's like my whole life is just making choices all day.
It is interesting, especially when you've been able to be successful at certain things, whether that's taking care of your family or your business or fitness or whatever it is, or social. The little, like, that's the whole point of the book, the little habits, the little like daily things that you do, to certain people, it's not a thing. It's a natural, it's like breathing. They're like, what do you mean you have to choose to breathe? Like, I just breathe. Yeah. Right. What do you mean you have to choose to keep up with your friends? Like, you just do, right? Like, you call your friend, like if you haven't talked to them in a while, you call them. And it's like, well, yeah, this for you, that sounds, it's a no brainer. It's so easy.
Yeah.
But for other people, it's like, oh, so that's why you have such this entourage of great friends. Like, you make an effort, and that effort doesn't always happen naturally for everybody. And so the ones that doesn't happen for, you kind of have to force it. But yeah, anyways, that's funny. I'm glad you mentioned that.
Yeah. It's interesting, huh? And so, and I have, it's because people ask me all the time, like, what books should I read? Okay. And I have way too many financial wealth conversations with people, right? Because I kind of lived that world in my head for so long and was so hyper focused and built systems and, the whole thing where I'm just like, yeah. I would love to help you and share the knowledge that I have. Yeah. And now I'm at the point in my life where I'm like, I don't even want to talk about finances. Like, what's going on with you? Like I like to get into people and like learn them and kind of like almost sociology, right? Where it's like, help me understand you. And then let me talk about me. And like, let's keep on molding this relationship back and forth. And that's actually served me really well in the fact that I can get tight with someone like that, where I kind of understand people, especially when the setting allows it to happen. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like when we're down in these Ludus masterminds, it's real easy to get to know people really, really quickly, right? Because you want to share and you want to be heard and then you want to talk and then you want to hear other people. It's like that beautiful kind of like relationship thing. And I just care so much more about that now that when people like want to recommend a book, I'm like, well, what's this book about? And it's like, well, it's this really inspiring story of how a guy built a business. And I'm just like, like, I don't even care anymore. You know what I mean? Like, don't give me a book that's like got something like actually the David Goggins book. Mm-hmm. It's probably the last book that I read. I can't remember what it's called.
Yeah, Can't Hurt Me?
Yeah, Can't Hurt Me. Yeah. He just barely came out with a new one. Did you know that? Uh-huh. Yeah, so the Can't Hurt Me book, there was so much interpersonal strife and stories in there and just kind of like badassery as well, right? Like Boat Crew 2. Remember we were screaming that down in St. George? Because Jonah loves it,
Who's going to carry the boat?
Yeah, who's going to carry the boat? Boat Crew 2 or Boat Crew 2? It's just like, I love that stuff. But like I was able to like connect with David Goggins in that book, especially because I listened to it. Mm-hmm. And so, because he narrated it. I hate books that the author doesn't narrate. Because I'm like always conflicted with who I'm listening to, right? Yeah. Some voice actor versus like your own voice. But yeah, that book was so cool in the fact that I was just able to connect with it but you could take that book in a million directions, right? You could take it and apply it to a business. You could take it and apply it to your family, yourself, personal development, like whatever you want to kind of tie it to, because it's just kind of like it's just his story. It's just a sloth of everything that he found important. And those are the books that I kind of like now more than just like I read the Phil Knight book.
Shoe Dog?
Yeah, Shoe Dog.
Yeah.
That's been
classic.
Yeah. And that one's inspiring, but to me, it doesn't really tell you how to get a business moving, right? Yeah. Couple stories in there, like Waffle irons a shoe and it goes and tries really hard to sell it, But knowing how big businesses work, it's like, man, you could write a 12-series novel about all the things that happened to build Nike into the greatest apparel company that's ever existed, sports apparel company. And that's the kind of stuff that I'd like to get into, like the real details. And that's why I like talks more, because I feel like when people give talks, they have to summarize in 20 minutes or 40 minutes or an hour or whatever they're doing. They got to summarize a whole bunch of stuff. And if you throw a panel discussion on at the end, I'm all about panel discussions.
Yeah.
I just think it's fun especially when people say smart things to them, it's like really good questions. And they're like, oh yeah, let me tell you how that actually went down. It's like, how did you deal with a shitty partner in your business? They're like, yeah, that was awkward, man. I had to exit him, How'd you do that? And it's like, well, the way the operation agreements are written, I knew he didn't have that much money. So I did a cash call, then I diluted the shit out of him, and then boom. And it's like, oh, like, that's interesting. That's how that actually went down. Instead of telling the fun story where it's like, well, we came together and we had a chat and we decided to buy him out of his equity. It's like, no, you didn't. You freaking ripped him out of your business because that's how you did it.
Yeah.
Like those stories to me are way more interesting. And to me, I find like those interesting stories normally come from like a panel discussion or people asking questions.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, obviously, depending on the structure of like how it's written or whatever, I gravitate towards, if possible, the ones that have a little bit more of like an organizational, like how to, like, hey, do this, then do that. Some of the books, like you mentioned, the Shoe Dog book, one of my favorite parts about that is it isn't really a how-to book, which is one of the reasons it was so tough for me to actually read it. Cause like, I was like, okay, where's the bullet points? Like, give me the, do this, then that, cause I feel like I'm in the middle of, a bit of a battle with, building and scaling companies. And I'm always like, hey, okay, how do I do, like you said, hey, if I need to get rid of somebody, like, okay, how do we do that again? What's the cash call? Like, let me take some notes on that specific, like tactical approach of like moving the pieces around the board. But the Shoe Dog thing was interesting because my company Paxi, we have a product called LightCam, and it took a hot minute for us to get it out to the market. It's awesome. I mean, essentially it's doing for professional outdoor cameras what, Ring did for intercom cameras, or what Drop Cam did for IP cameras. It's just a way simpler, smoother, faster, easier way to like, boom, I've got a professional outdoor camera in 30 seconds, right? But in that discussion, in that book, they kind of go through the process of just this continual like focus on the future vision of how you're going to evolve and help the world. And this relentless pursuit of like, hey, everybody faces continual obstacles. And so if they give you the how-to playbook, there's a chance that playbook's not going to work because you're going to come across such a diverse, uniquely specific challenge of opportunities and problems that you're going to have to read. Like you said, you're going to have to read 12 tomes. You're going to have to read, 100 books. And you don't know if they're reading the book that's specifically for that problem right at that moment. But those other ones, those other stories, those inspirational talks, those like the panel things, you often get down to like the real of like, hey, so, you just sold your company, you just did this, you did all these things that we would, raise the flag of, oh, that guy's a success. And, from the outside, we were like, oh man, he always knew he was going to make it. And it was just like, inevitable, right? We all know that you're going to be massively talented, successful, whatever it is. But when you're like on the ground and you're actually like in the battle, you're actually in the Super Bowl, everybody knows that you're going to be the champion on both sides until one of you is and one of you isn't, right?
Yeah.
And the issue is just that perseverance of like, when you read those stories of, can you keep going? Can you just say, all right, well, in view of success or failure, do you just keep going towards that vision, whether that's the happy family or the awesome relationship with a spouse? Because everything else is just, like you said, it's all just kind of a stop along the way. Like the goal isn't like, oh man, if I go to Disneyland and then I'm successful, if I get the swanky car, then I can prove to everybody that I'm valuable. And it's like, no, you're valuable no matter what. So you can get the car if you want it. You don't have to. Doesn't change anything. Doesn't make you more special or less special, right? But if that's important to you, guess what? You'll find a way to do it because you won't give up. You'll just keep going forward. So anyways, that was interesting. I love that you brought up Shoe Dog because I just read that a little while ago and I was like, you know, I didn't know what to expect. So everyone's like, oh man, it's such a good book and it's Trend Central. And I was like, all right, cool. And then tell me like, and it was like, so much of the book was like all about just really, really sucky things happening to them. It's like this onslaught. It's like, wait, am I reading about the same company? Like the global behemoth that like runs the apparel game? Cause this kind of sounds like a crappy corner coffee shop that's just struggling to stay in business.
Yeah. It is so interesting too, because I feel like the problem with getting people to recommend you stuff is it comes from such their perspective, you know, and it's like, this is crazy weird that, really like with Shoe Dog, right? It's someone who loves Nike. If they love Nike apparel, they're like, this is the greatest book ever. Like it's so good. Right. And you're like, it's not that good. This is not a good book. You know what I mean? I love Nike, but I'm not, well, and that's another thing too. You got your perspective too. It's like, well, I need to glean some stuff out of this. And it's like, well, there's like 2 things in here that maybe even apply to me. You know? Yeah. And so that's why I have a hard time recommending books to people too. You know, have I ever recommended a book to you? Probably not, right?
No.
We probably never asked.
No.
So there's one book that I recommend to everybody, and it's The Intelligent Investor by Benjamin Graham. Have you ever heard of that book?
No.
That's Warren Buffett's mentor.
I'm sure I've heard of it, and it's like probably on a list of, I got like hundreds of books on hundreds of lists.
Oh, dude, it's the boringest book you've ever read in your entire life. I had to read it. I think I read it 3 times. The first time when I was done with it, I was so overwhelmed with what I was, because I was bored as hell. It talks about bonds, right? It's talking about stocks and bonds, right? And I think the original book was written, I'm going to be wrong, but I want to say 50s, 40s, 50s, 60s, somewhere in there. Hell, it might be the 40s. It's been a while since I've read it. I read it all in my 20s. But it's about bonds. Like most of the book is about bonds and stocks and how they kind of play with each other and then like their investment strategy. Like it is crazy boring. It's also why you hear me say like, guys, listen, if you're investing in something, if it isn't boring, you're doing it wrong. You're gambling. If you've in the most exciting investment you've ever been in, you're just gambling because investing's actually boring. But I can tell if someone really wants to learn about like, we'll just say equity investing more than anything, if they'll actually read that book. Because it's a hard read and it's long. I want to say it's 600 or 700 pages.
Yikes!
It's a beatdown. It's a rough book.
You know what's funny? A while ago I read a book called On the Wealth of Nations, which is like a review of the Wealth of Nations, but it's like a super interesting updated version. And I read that and I was like, dude, this is just awesome. Like this is like phenomenal. Like I gleaned so much. So I was like, dude, well, if this is so good, I should actually read like the OG. Like I'll read The Wealth of Nations, like the Adam Smith. Like let me. Haven't read it yet. Tried it. It was like, oh man, it was so hard to read. I was like, man.
I've got that one on audiobook and I can't get 15 minutes in every time. I'm like, oh, this one's rough.
Dude, I'm like, man, I love that there are people that exist. Like this guy that's like, hey, I took this 600-page thing that has all this amazing stuff that I know none of you can read. And I'm going to rewrite it in a 200-page book in a way that'll just be all killer, no filler, right?
Yeah.
But I agree with you. Sometimes you've got to pick and choose the winners like that.
Well, another thing that's interesting too, so I'll go back to Atomic Habits. And by the way, I would recommend that book for people to read. But I also think that book should have been 50 pages long. Like there's a ton of filler in there. Just like, well, here's a good principle. And let me write some more words so this is actually a book.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Where it's like,
I can't tell you an outline. It's like, it's 18 bullet points. It's 1 page, but it's $20 for the outline.
Right.
All right.
So funny enough, there was a man that existed one time and his name was Mark McCormack, but he's not me. His middle name's Hume. I think it's Hume.
Yeah.
He actually started IMG Model Agency and he was a huge agent for like superstars. I think he was like Jack Nicklaus and Arnold Palmer and like Tiger Woods at some point.
Kind of like that Ari Emanuel kind of character.
Yeah. So have you ever seen the movie Wimbledon? Mm-hmm. Okay. So at the end of it, it says dedicated to Mark McCormack. So I watched it with my friends years and years ago. I was like, I don't know how you guys pulled that off, but that's pretty cool. And they're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, how'd you get my name on here? Like, this is the weirdest thing ever. It's like a red box. Back then people know what Redbox is. And so I Googled him, right? I had never actually Googled my own name because why would you Google yourself, 15 years ago? And I was like, oh, this dude's amazing. He also wrote the book, What They Don't Teach at Harvard Business School. And he wrote a bunch of books. The best book that he's ever written, which I've actually gifted to some people, is called Never Wrestle with a Pig. And what it really is all about, it is bullet point advice through the whole thing. And I'm telling you, most people could probably get between 60 and 80% of that book applies to them. But it's like 1 or 2 pages of like his advice. And it just kind of goes through this whole advice book. And I'm like, dude, if I ever write a book one day, I'm going to write it really similar to this, which is also hilarious because we share the same freaking name. I'm Mark M. McCormack and he's Mark H. McCormack. And so, but those are the type of books, I kind of say that to kind of get to the point. But those are the kind of books that I really like because I feel like I can pick them up and put them down. And I don't have to like re-engage with it. I can almost like actually Never Wrestle with the Pig I had on my toilet for like ever because I would just like sit there and pick it up before our phones became super cool. It was back when I had a BlackBerry. And I would literally read 4 or 5 pages every day and kind of put it back, and then I just kept on tapping that book over and over again. And those are the books that I really, really like. But the ones, they're just full of stories and examples. I'm always like, I get it. Like, I don't need to have 5,000 examples of whatever point you're trying to get across just to fill your book for 200 pages.
Yeah, you hear that. I don't know if this is actually his quote, but it sounds like his quote. There was a story about Abraham Lincoln who wrote some letter to one of his generals. And when he finished the letter, he said, I apologize for the length of my correspondence. I didn't have time to write a shorter letter. I always thought that was pretty interesting.
Oh, interesting.
I'm an attorney. I don't practice a bunch, but in law school, one of the interesting things is, when you go to school as a kid and it's like, you need to write an essay. It has to be 2 pages or 5 pages. In law school, it's the opposite. It's like, you're not allowed to write more than 5 pages.
Yeah.
Like this brief can't be more than 15 pages, right? Hey, you need to do this monster thesis. Like I did it, you do this huge writing project is, one of the other things. And I did it on, like this in-depth research of like, multi-use development, right? Like huge properties where it's like residential, commercial, office space, retail. And you get into this situation where they're like, yeah, you're not allowed to write over X pages. And it's like, oh, sweet. Well, so I can just turn this in like 10 pages. I'm like, dude, yeah. If you can get your thesis across in 10 pages, you're a freaking hero.
Yeah.
If you can boil this down to 1 page and it actually delivers the answer, there's so much to be said to that. So it's funny when you're like, yeah, selling a book, they want it to feel like a book. Yeah. But really the truth is like, hey, if you could communicate the same idea with the same powerfulness in 20 pages instead of 200, that's actually the goal.
Yeah. I'm almost sitting here thinking it'd be funny, right? To write like 25 advice books that are all 50 pages long, just so clear and concise. Just sell them all together, right? 25 books, bam, bam, bam.
Yeah, maybe. Well, I wonder, sometimes you wonder though, cause like, for example, like we were talking about before, certain things really resonate with people. Mm-hmm. And I think when you're, I've never written a, monster book. I've written some stuff, but what I've noticed is a lot of times you're really hoping to convey whatever concept that you're trying to convey in the right way. And I think that sometimes those writers, they over-explain, over story time, over whatever, just because of their desire, their exasperation to communicate to you in a way that hits. And maybe they have to say it 3 different ways because the first way really worked and the other 2 were just a waste on you. But you never know. I mean, maybe that was the goal. I hope.
Yeah, kind of stretching the audience, right?
Give them the benefit of the doubt and say, okay, the reason they had to drive this point home 3 different stories is because not every, different strokes, different folks, right?
Yeah. I believe that. That could be true.
I hope so.
You never know. It'd actually be interesting to talk with an editor and be like, hey, how come every book you guys publish, not an editor, a publisher.
Yeah. Why don't you refine it down?
Yeah. Why are we hitting 223 every single time you guys do a book? Well, we have market research and data that shows us that if the book isn't, X amount of pages, no one will buy it. It's like, oh, okay.
Hey man, have you ever read As a Man Thinketh?
I don't know if I read that one or not.
It's like,
who wrote that one? you remember?
I don't know. I wish I knew, but it's I mean, like legitimate. It's like 20 pages and it's brilliant.
Oh, really?
It's a I think you can listen to it in like 14 minutes or something. It's real. It's just like that. It's like, hey, just a handful of thoughts, concepts. No need to get too super deep. No stories. Just, hey, let me walk you through, his thoughts on, thoughts versus reality and how they kind of correlate together.
Yeah.
But I think that's like we were talking about examples of, can I get it where there's no stories, there's no filler, there's no fluff. It's like, well, that's a great example of that book.
Yeah. Well, that's super interesting. I have not read it because I would remember that it's super short and probably appreciate it.
There it is. I will, if I'm going to recommend a book, I would recommend that one because then you can do it in 15 minutes.
Well, I've got a 30-minute drive after this. I'm going to knock it out on my audiobook. So that's cool. So tell me more about Paxi.
So
I know a little bit about it, but I want to hear all of it.
Yeah. So, a number of years ago, I was traveling a lot and I had a tree in my alleyway behind my house. So one of those houses where you got the garage faces the alleyway. Mm-hmm. And, like one of the branches was like just decimated. I'm like, what the crap? Like, how did this happen? Right. And fortunately, like it was a huge branch and it was, still alive, and so I was able to like, basically like, fix it to the tree and, strap it up and do all this stuff. And like, we're good. Right. Kept growing. Everything was super cool. And then, I don't know, 6 months later or whatever, just freaking got ripped off, like completely torn off the tree. Now I'm pissed. Cause like, and you like put a bit of effort in and you're like, dude, I saved this huge branch and like the tree's going to keep growing. It's going to be, and then it's like on the ground. At that point, I'm like, all right, dude, I got to figure out who is like abusing my property. Yeah. And sure enough, like, there's some HOA where I live and it's like, okay, you can't actually mount, anything on the house, on the front of the back of the house. So I couldn't put up, I'd worked in security and surveillance for, a number of years and I couldn't put up any of the commercially available solutions that I have at my disposal. So I just figured, all right, well, cool. I'll just replace the lantern. It's got 2 of those lanterns on the sides of the garage. Like, I'll just replace that. It'll be great. They have those with the built-in cameras and all that stuff. And sure enough, HOA, all of the light fixtures down this alley have to match, and you can't just be the one that has weird standouts. So it was kind of frustrating for me. And I was like, geez, well, you know what? I just need a light bulb camera. Because, there's power, there's the lights, just put it in there. And everything I found just didn't work. Like it wouldn't work inside of a glass enclosed fixture, like a lantern, sconce, like they didn't have it. So I built one, kind of Frankenstein it together and, did a little bit of, IP research with some law firm here. And they're like, yeah, like doesn't seem like this is patented space IP. Like, so we, filed some stuff and, a series of, different, partners and opportunities and companies and things helped get it developed into a real product. And, we've got a ton of utility patents on it, that enable it to really, to function within inside of, almost any light fixture whatsoever. So we started building those and, really the interesting thing is in like, for example, in the United States alone, there's, anywhere between 36 to, 38% of us rent, apartments, townhomes, condos, mobile homes, that kind of stuff. So you really can't put in any kind of permanent, security device, any permanent, remote connection device. You can't take the doorbell off and put on a doorbell camera. You can't, screw a battery powered camera into the wall. Like, it's like, and nor would you want to. It's like putting in a new sink in your apartment. That's not your sink. That's not your apartment, right? You're just not going to do it. But, if you live there for a year or two or longer, and, there are times when, say, your kids come home from school at 2 or 2:30 or whatever, and you don't get off work till 6. Well, you typically want to know if there's someone around your property, especially before they're in your property, right? Like, hey, can I have a camera or something at my door, at my garage, or whatever it is, right? And so creating something that was really transferable that you could have while you're there. And then when you move, you just take it out, right? You just unscrew my light bulb and take it with me. They're obviously set up in a way where, they can't be stolen. They can't be this. They can't be repurposed or used unless you give permission. And, when you go to connect it to Wi-Fi, you can GPS it. So, there's a lot of things that we've gone through that process to make sure that they're just awesome, and helpful. And then from there, we just kind of built out a series of, additional smart home and security products that all go off that idea of just no install, super simple transferability. So it can go with you wherever you go. It can grow with you because it's all piecemeal. You can add, different components like, oh, I want this to control my thermostat. I want this to control my garage door. And again, we've looked at it and said, okay, how do we build it, everything we have, in a way that it's just simple. You just plug and connect on the app. Most of the devices can actually find each other. So after you've connected the Bluetooth, pushed your Wi-Fi to the device, kind of like hooking up headphones or pairing your phone to your car. Once it's already done, it can find the other devices and it'll push the Wi-Fi to those devices. So then you don't actually even have to set up each one at a time. You just set up one and that sets everything else up. So that's been our major goal, is providing this kind of unique solution especially for people in those situations. I mean, that's, 80 to 100 million people in America. If you're talking about a third of America, that just don't have a solution. There's nothing they can't permanently install in their location. So we provide something that they can have and take with them and grow with them. We've partnered with a lot of complexes and funds that own, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of these units, so they can provide it to their tenants as an awesome service, bring a lot of just comfort of, hey, I can go, I can come, I don't have to worry because I know if anything's around my place, I'll be able to see it almost instantaneously, two-way communication. So you can see, hear, talk. Obviously with the LightCam, we can, control everything. So hue, color control, it's got really unbelievable motion identification built into the unit. So everything from telling the difference between a dog and a car and a package. We've got things that allow you to do, facial recognition for familiar parties that's in device, not on the cloud. So it's not in any position where even we have access to it. Does that make sense? Yeah. So we wanted it to be convenient and usable for the individual, but also empowering and not subjecting them to, a lot of times people say, oh, it's just a trade-off you have to make. It's a trade-off, you want to be on social media, that's cool. But you got to trade off these loss of privacy and loss of control. So we've made that a real big function and focus is, can we empower these people to be able to provide and run their life in a better fashion, regardless of where they're at? Can we do it in a way that's really easy so that you don't have the complexity and the expense of, a professional install of, these products, but at the same time, not lose the quality? Because a lot of times when you've got this fight of well, you can get it done really nice, but it's super expensive and really complex, or you can get it really cheap and it's probably going to fail. It's right. It's hard to be in that situation of well, I do care about my family. I do care about my kids, but I'm not made of money. I live in an apartment. I live in a townhouse. I can't pay, or worse, a lot of them, they just don't qualify. You call them up and, hey, I want to get this, high-end professional solution. And they'll be like, oh, cool. Is this your house? And it's no. It's oh, cool. Well, sorry. Call us when you own a property. It's well, are my kids' lives not still valuable? And they're yeah, we agree. It's just not to us. We can't provide a solution for you right now. Sorry, you don't control where you live. And it's well, for 30+% of Americans, that's the case. And so if we can provide them a really easy, simple solution that transfers with them wherever they go, that's where we're at. And then long-term, obviously, as we get a bigger footprint and scale up, we'll spread out to other parts of the world as well. There's a lot of people that they have power, they have Wi-Fi. if we can provide the ability for them to remotely connect in and keep an eye on what's important to them, then we feel like we've made the impact we want.
Oh, cool. So our light, I don't know what you call it, but the connection point on a light, are those universal throughout the world, or do they change?
Just like, in fact, I'll show you this one. So just like anywhere, you're going to have some standards, but you're also going to have, countries and different places that choose different standards, just like any power outlet plug, right? Yeah. So for example, in North America, this is typically the Edison version, the Edison, 2627, right? And that's how wide it is, right? So like the Edison 11 is like the little one, the little candelabra kind of thing.
Gotcha.
So we have adapters that allow you to go from this to almost any size you want. Over time, if it's popular enough in an area with a different power connector, we'll definitely provide
customize it.
Provide a unit specifically, a SKU specifically for that area. But inside, like the power, for example, there's a transformer that allows the LEDs and the camera and everything to work, and that functions on both European and North America. I mean, the 220 to the 110 power.
Yeah.
So we don't really have to change much, to be honest. I was really happy about that. Like physically, the hardware, we don't have to change almost anything to be able to function in different parts of the world. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that, manufacturing's very, very much, globalized at this point. So they're really pushing, like, as you notice, like from uniform power connectors, whether that's USB or USB-C, they're really trying to make it possible for these areas that build wonderful products to be able to be shared with everybody regardless of location.
Yeah.
So we're going to lean into that. As it makes sense as we grow. Obviously we're focusing on the area that's most economical, so that we can continue to scale. It's like that concept that Walt Disney always said. He's like, I don't make money, or I don't make movies to make money. I make money so I can make movies.
Yeah.
So that's been our main focus, is we're focusing on where we're most successful so we can continue to grow to provide, bigger impact.
Yeah.
Economies of scale hopefully will get us to a place where we can lower the price on the hardware. Is just every chance we get, we try to get it to be more and more affordable, so that more and more areas of the world will open up to us, so that if we can provide something that watches out for their family, that'll be awesome.
So I'm assuming you have, you sell the unit itself, and then there's a monitoring package on top of it?
Yeah. So, so at like Paxi.com, so PAXI.com, we sell everything. And a lot of it can come with, optional services that make it even better to use. So for example, inside, built into the unit, there's some memory, there's some functionality, just baseline. So when you get it, it's already ready to work and to deliver. Yeah. But there are things where people, they want, hey, I want cloud backup, so that if the device is just completely obliterated, I've got that stored offsite somewhere. Mm-hmm. Fair enough. It costs us money. We make money, obviously, selling that service. Same thing with expandable storage. So like, to make the device affordable, like if you put a terabyte of storage inside the device, that's going to cost a lot of money. So instead of being, the price for just the device, the price plus a ton more. So to make it a little easier, you have expandable storage for those who need it, and those who don't need to pay for it. Same thing with, the protections for the home. Like we have professional 24/7, connection to police, medical, fire emergencies for those homes. So if they have a problem, there are things we can do on our side to provide that continual, support to their home. So if they're gone, hey, I'm in Tahiti and boom, somebody messed with my house, we can have a response to that in just a matter of moments, and then dispatch the appropriate response. Because a lot of times, think about it, there are some damages that happen in an emergency situation, but often the real significant losses occur because of the time between the emergency and the response. You know what I mean? So if someone gets into your house and they have 30 seconds before something responds, it's not enough time for them really to get anything, let alone get away with anything. You know what I mean? If you have some kind of thing in your house that's smoking, you know, whatever that is, if you know about it and you have a response to it, then you're good. But if you let that thing smoke for quite a while, and pretty soon it's a complete loss. Yeah. So that's we have those services, we have those things that we offer to people to allow them to pick and choose. You know, they can monitor and run everything off their own phone, off their own devices. So whatever works best for them is what we're interested in.
Yeah. So how long has Paxi been in the market?
So, we invented and built the original prototypes back in 2018, and then we've just been growing and iterating since then. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. So how many states are you guys in? Are you in almost every state?
So we are set up in the entire United States. So monitoring, licenses, all that stuff. So basically pretty much everywhere. And you kind of have to be. I mean, we sell through a number of channels. One of the biggest ones obviously is just e-commerce. Lots and lots of people they're just like, oh, that's great, I need that. Yeah. And they buy it online and we send it out to them, and then they, grab their smartphone, and 45 seconds later, they're like, dude, I'm like a pro at this. Like, that's really cool.
So are you selling on Amazon?
Yeah. So we work with a company called Reach Channels, which is awesome. They're just phenomenal. They work with a lot of groups to help them have a unified approach. So the main reason is, essentially selling online, selling in these e-tailers, is essentially like, it's just like selling at any big retail location. There's really unique challenges. There's really unique opportunities. And we've got, just an exceptional partner that, they work with humongous, gigantic brands to help them bring a unified pricing, unified strategy that really empowers you to deliver to those customers without it being a bit of a hodgepodge. Yeah. Because that can happen. Like if you've got distributors and you've got all these different channels and you've got these different things, you can end up with, like, for example, say someone wants to resell your product, right? There are people that if they're going to buy a new iPhone or new whatever, they're not comfortable going on Craigslist, hey, I'm used iPhone. They want to buy like from the originator, right? They want to buy it from, hey, sold by this, sold by that. So they know they're getting something authentic. They know they're getting something that is warranted and in, perfect, working condition, all that stuff. Yeah. So so selling on Amazon, working with this partner has helped us in a way where we can kind of guarantee that when people go to buy our products, wherever they see them online, it's authentic, it's guaranteed, it's backed, it's official, it's through us. And if it's not, then it's really easy for us to shut that down, right? There's not just like a plethora of whoever reselling our stuff. It's us or it's nobody.
Well, that's a great idea. I know there's a lot of, the reason why I ask about Amazon is it's interesting. There's a lot of people that have problems with Amazon, right? Because Amazon competes against you online, right? And so, and then they also have a lot of power because they can move your product really quickly. So they can also eat up a lot of your marketing and a lot of your, market essentially.
Yeah, it's very challenging. We're in a very, I would say, blessed situation where most of everything we offer, we have unique, patented, protected IP. So it's not the case where I'm selling a fungible commodity. If I was selling, apples or selling snorkels or, whatever it is, something online where someone could knock it off with impunity and, deliver relatively the same kind of quality. And the real question is just whose listing is first.
Right.
At some point, in 20 years, I'm sure we'll invent more patents and stuff. But, theoretically, if we didn't have that and our product was, all over the market or whatever, or someone could actually create something that's, comparable to it, then that would be a much bigger challenge for us. And so that's like, for example, I get a lot of people reaching out to me, and I'm 100% in favor of helping. Like, I always have time, especially for, you know, people who are really trying to impact the world with whatever product that they've invented, whatever thing that they've done, or whatever business they're trying to build.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest core things that I always, you know, I feel is important to try to stress is any part of what you're doing the secret sauce? Is it protectable? Is it unique? Can you get some kind of ability to enforce that piece? Because that's tough, because it's like, oh, Amazon competes and these guys compete and it's unfair. And it's like, dude, well, you're selling the same thing that everybody else is.
Yeah.
Your secret sauce can't come from just, well, they're competing with me. It's like, well, of course they are. You're competing with them.
Yeah.
You know, congrats. You have to come up with something that's unique and special. And maybe that is how you compete. Maybe that's how you market your product. Maybe that's how you SEO. Maybe that's, hey, we don't sell on Amazon, or we do sell on Amazon, but we're playing according, because Amazon's got some really unique ways where you can be really successful, but you got to really play according to their rules.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know those rules, so I use other partners who do, and they help us be successful there. Yeah. But if you can really iterate on evolving your offering of the world into something that is novel, right? Unique, not available elsewhere, then you lock that down. You try to do your very best to say, hey, this is our unique special thing we created. We're going to go and get, you know, some legal, you know, coverage for that thing. And then that gives you a little bit of an opportunity. It gives you a little bit of breathing room to say, hey, we're unique and special. And also brings massive brand value, because, you know, long-term, like what we've been doing in the hardware space is really difficult, right? We've of course been approached by lots of companies wanting to collaborate or partner, or even buy us, you know, completely. And, you know, something that people bring up to me, it's like, oh, well, you know, why wouldn't they just, you know, they see what you're doing. Why would, you know, they're a much bigger company. Why don't they just go to their manufacturers and just build something similar, or build? And the answer is, if they've been successful in building hardware, they already know it's super difficult. It takes years to innovate. And once you've created these special solutions, these, you know, proprietary whatevers, like, they already realize that. They're like, half the time, like, the reason they're not in that industry at all is because they either don't have a solution to the thing you just solved, which is, you know, high five to you, good job, or you came up with the solution first and it's protected. So they can't do the same solution you did. They have to do something different. And unfortunately, sometimes there's just only one answer to certain problems.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest issue of all of it is that they just don't have the time. They just are like, hey, you've built it. It's awesome. It works. Like, let's partner. Let us buy you. Let us, you know, people, you see that in the market today, where they got these big companies, the Googles and Amazons and Microsofts and Facebooks, and, you know, the list goes on, GE, you know, everybody, these huge companies. And you look at the history of their company, and over time, they bring scale, they bring new markets, they bring, you know, economies and synergies that these smaller companies don't have. And the smaller companies prove out to have massive value because of their unique pursuit of solutions, of thinking outside the box. Like, one of the things that's been such an interesting revelation, and I share this with people, that, like, it's an advantage. They often say, well, yeah, well, you know, I've got this idea, but how would I compete, or how would I even do it? Because there's all these huge companies, and by the time my idea kind of gets sorted out, they'll have copied it and just, you know, outstrip me. And a lot of times I tell them, like, look, the reason your idea hasn't been built, even though it seems so obvious, is that a lot of times big companies, big manufacturers, big whatevers, they're optimizing for something different. Like, for example, when we built our LightCam, what we were optimizing for was functionality. We wanted it to work day, night. You know, we wanted to make sure there's no glare. We wanted to make sure there was a panoramic wide angle view. We didn't want to have like a pan and tilt camera with a motor in it. those are awesome, but they're for surveillance. So it's kind of like watching your kid, like a baby monitor or like a casino active surveillance. Like we needed it to feel panoramic, like, hey, I can see almost the whole yard all the time, no matter what. So if something happens, you just don't miss it. Same thing with the glare and some of the other functionalities. But to do that, it built a more complex product.
Right.
Complexity equals cost. So when you're talking to a manufacturer, most of the time what they're doing is they're optimizing for cost. What's the least cost of goods sold I can get? Sometimes it's like for example, our product works with multiple different types of bands of Wi-Fi. So when you go to connect it, it just connects. It costs more money to do that. Like we could do it where, we only support one band. Okay, well, cool. Well, when you go to connect it, like you need to know how to do that. And if you don't happen to have that band at your house, well, sorry that the product doesn't work. And it's actually your fault, not ours. It's like, it's your Wi-Fi's fault, not ours. Well, people don't know that, right? So you're approaching this setup of what do you need to do to take on the hard things first to make it easier for your customers, and two, are you optimizing for the correct things? Because what I was finding is every manufacturing partner, every sourcing group, everybody I was working with, they were always pushing to go back to this will be easy to manufacture, it'll be cheap. It won't work in the practical field, but they don't know that because they're not focused on that piece. So anyways, it's a bit of a longer story, but it's been an interesting road for us to learn about focusing on what are you trying to deliver? What is your function? And not getting confused with optimizing for things that, you shouldn't have to or shouldn't bother with.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. I think it sounds like it's an amazing product. Have you loved doing it?
Yeah. Well, the weird thing is, I'm a bit of an obsessive compulsive human. And so I like seeing things through to fruition, right? Like I want, if we were to say tomorrow, if you said, hey dude, let's walk to New York. Like it doesn't matter what is between here and there. We'll arrive. It might take a while, but if I say that I'm going there, there's nothing else I'm going to do until I'm there. So it's been quite a challenge. But for me, like it's more about the delivery of the process and the ultimate result. Like everybody does business, everybody does different, different products that provide different value, right? This is a unique product in that it's essentially a security product at its base, right? We're looking after human value. We're looking after families. We're looking after, the most important property that you have. It's what you store in your home, right? It is your home in general. Yeah. So when you take those transactions to scale, right? When you say, hey, we've deployed 100 cameras, we've deployed 100,000 cameras, we've deployed 1 million cameras, right? And systems and everything else that's built on top of that. Statistically, over time, your product will be the difference between, catastrophe and, just a close call.
Yeah.
Or, I don't know. There's just some weird guy outside my house and I saw it on my thing. So I thought, hey man, what can I do for it? And he's like, I'm lost. And he left. You have no idea. You don't know if that was the difference maker between, your kids having a terrible day that's going to offset their life forever but in the end, it doesn't matter. I mean, that's the part that has made it really special and compelling for me to keep pushing through the challenges and opportunities is the net impact of keeping in mind of like, why are we doing this business? Like, what's our vision? And that always revolves around, well, if we deploy, one of these in every apartment in the entire world, how many people's lives will be just completely blessed by the fact that it's there?
Yeah. And
so that's really, it's not as much of is it fun? Is it not fun? Have you enjoyed it or not? It's like, it's been pretty difficult, like anybody doing any big endeavor. It's been really, stressful and, a lot of like, moments where you're like, dude, I don't know if this can work or or we need this, this, and this to work, or else we're like really, really stuck. Yeah. And I've noticed that like, because we're so obsessed with the end result, like none of the obstacles in front of us are like the end. If that makes sense. It's like, oh, there's the Grand Canyon. All right. Well, it's going to take longer, but I guess we're going to walk around it.
Yeah.
And you know, hats off to our team, especially our engineering team. They are legitimately just the most brilliant and relentless people. You know, cause it's like, you know, we had this challenge we faced where we had to rebuild a ton of firmware, middleware, our whole freaking cloud that controls and runs everything. And, you know, for basically about a month, maybe more, we were like a day away from being done.
Right.
You know, it's like, dude, just this, and then we pack and it's going to be great. And then as soon as that thing was fully functional and amazing, and it would unveil, you know, reveal, whatever you want to say, the next little crack. And the hardest part of all of it was all the cracks, all the issues, all the stuff they were resolving for had nothing to do with them. It was all stuff that came from different contractors, different, just, it is what it is. When you're working in a connected internet world, you don't have the luxury of having built everything. Yeah. Most of the time you're taking, hey, I got to take this piece of firmware. I got to get this kernel from these guys. I got to get this bit of code from this other group. And then you orchestrate it together in this beautiful recipe that culminates in an amazing product. But sometimes when you get handed something, it's like, oh, yeah, this thing's going to have a 15% failure rate because of how they wrote this whole section. So we're going to have to rewrite that section. And it's supposed to be handed to you perfect.
Right.
And they're like, oh, well, yeah, well, that'll work just fine. You know, you just have to write this apology patch. And it's like, or you could have just wrote it perfect the first time. So let me, and they're not, obsessed with perfection as much as they're obsessed with delivering for our customers. Yeah. And so it's like, anyways, it's been really special because I would have never had a ghost of a chance of getting to a place where we're helping this many people and affecting this many lives without brilliant, talented people that are willing to give up, nights, weekends. We have one just brilliant engineer that was working with this contractor to work on some of this base level firmware stuff. And it's something he's never done, or it's just like out of his wheelhouse. Right. And I don't know, I don't know enough about the coding and the languages and stuff to really know. Right. Cause it's, it's something where you're just like, you just take for granted that they just know everything. Right? It's like, yeah, hey, so you speak Spanish, right? Well, this guy has some Italian. He needs and it's like, well, they're kind of related, but and here he is. He's like helping these guys dev this firmware. And I'm like, dude, I didn't know you did firmware dev. He's like, I don't. And I was like, well, you're like sure being incredibly helpful. Like you're like fixing this whole thing. Like, how did you do that? He's like, I don't know. I just learned it, most of it last night. It was like the Tony Stark. Do you remember the Iron Man? Yeah. Where he's like, when did you become an expert in this? He's like, last night. Yeah. But yeah, when you have team members like that, man, it's hard to fail because you just have this weird confidence because you have no clue. You can't fix the things. Yeah. But they can. And so then you can just be bold and like, hey, we're going to go freaking help the entire world, because our team is that good.
Well, I'll tell you, man, we're coming up on our hard stop here, but it's amazing the passion you have for it, and it's going to be really cool. We're going to have to do another one of these in like a year probably and see exactly how far the company's come. Cause it's cool. I like the packaging. I like everything about it. I think you've built an amazing team from what it sounds like. I mean, and that's kind of why I asked if you're having fun, because trust me, if there's one person that knows that the daily grind is not fun, it's me. Yeah. But when you look back and look at where you're going, you see the team you've assembled, man, it can be amazing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and the fun piece, man, winning is fun, right? But you're not always winning. And even when you are winning, it's weird because like the things that were really important, oh man, we hit our first, we sold first unit, first 10 units, first 100 units, first 1,000, right? Whatever it is, it's funny how quickly those things that were the most important, like, oh man, like let's pop bottles and celebrate, become just like expected. Like suddenly it's like, oh man, if we have a day that we used to celebrate, now we'd be like morose. We'd be like, oh my gosh, like this was the worst day ever. Yeah. So it's funny, but like keeping that focus on the people, of enjoying the experience of working together with these brilliant people, and keeping the focus on the culminating value of delivering for a lot of customers. It makes the other things much more palatable. Yeah. Having been in sales for a long time, I've got this kind of mantra some people taught me where they're like, dude, you're never too high, never too low. Yeah. Right. Like when you have a really big day, it's not because that day was special. It's not because you did something unique. It's not like, yes, for sure, celebrate your stuff as best you can, but realize that most of the time the big days happen because you put in that law of averages. You put in months and years of bad days, of hard days. And so the good day is not, it's not an accident. It's inevitable, right? It's the result of the law of averages kicking in, where it's like, hey, if you want to be successful to a certain level, you've got to understand that failure's part of the ingredient. And so you've just got to keep giving it. So it's tricky. So sometimes it does drive my team a little crazy and my family a little crazy, because I'm mostly pretty level. So they're usually like, dude, this was like really big. Like should we celebrate? And I'm like, I don't know, go get an Oreo shake. Like, I don't know.
No, I think I normally ask people for 2 minutes of advice at the end of these, dude. I'm telling you, that's almost perfect advice. Don't be too high and don't be too low, because every day is going to, every day has its challenges, and every day, you can celebrate all sorts of crap, right? But really at the end of the day, it's like, you got to keep things moving.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and I do like the concept of celebration versus distraction, right? I think people who can, go out every weekend or whatever they're doing because either they're blessed or because they don't care or whatever. I think that it's not the savor's gone sometimes, like where it's not quite as fun to go to the club every weekend for no reason. Like I definitely back up the concept of like, hey, if you're going to go on a trip, if you're going to do something, it means, and it will be so much more enjoyable if it's in culmination of some accomplishment. Like, oh man, we're going on this trip because we did the following like amazing thing. For sure, I'm on board for that. The one thing that's a little tricky with the keeping your emotions level is that when things go really good, sometimes I have this stupid, like when things are bad, I'm like, oh, it's okay because I'm grinding and the good's going to come. Yeah. And then when things go really good, then I have this like quiet terror that I'm like, oh crap, I just cashed in. Yeah. I cashed in all those hard days and we're about to begin the hard days again. So I better, it's like, I just got, 2 big deals. I better go freaking hustle hard because, the law of average says I'm in for a lot of no's. I'm in for a lot of rejection and failure before the next pop of success. So that's the part that's a little tricky, because then I have, the team and the spouse and everybody's like, dude, this was a huge accomplishment. You need to stop and celebrate it. I'm like, oh, I'm too afraid to stop. Like, so.
Oh, cool, man. Well, I agree with you. Thanks for coming on the podcast today.
Yeah, loved it, man.
So we will definitely do this again. I wish I didn't have to go. Actually, I could talk about this all day with you.
No, so. They're gonna have to boil this down. It's gonna have a lot of editing here.
We don't boil this down at all, man. It's gonna go straight through, baby. But once again, Dan, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for my freaking badass shirt.
Yeah, dude.
And we got a lot of good times to have.
I'm excited. I'm looking forward to it.
Thanks for listening to the President McCormack Podcast, brought to you by McCormack Foundation, Saxton Fund, ADP Lemco, and Professional Floor Systems. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast and keep up with Mark on Instagram @President McCormack.